Okay, so it's come to my attention that some of you guys are having issues declaring and using variables, and something that I didn't quite say outright is speaking of literals, which are the values that you give to a variable. So, for example, if I say integer int of my int equals 5. In this case, my int is a variable and 5 is a literal because 5 is literally 5. So, for example, here, when I call console.writeLine and I have this, I'm passing this string here, this is a string literal because this is not a variable. So I am a string literal. You can see it displays because you can call a function with a variable or with a string literal. It's the same thing for the function because you're just passing a parameter. Either way, it's a string. It's just in one case it's a variable, and in a different case it's a literal, a string literal. But to the function they look the same. Not to us, but to the function they do. So in this other case, you guys see another write line, but this time I'm referencing a variable which holds this value. I am a literal assigned to a variable. So if we click run, I expect to see both lines display. And you see it's a similar effect. You're passing a string to the write line in either case. Now, something that I've seen happen, some people that have talked to me, they seem to struggle with this a little bit, and they'll call it write line and they'll write their actual variable name, but they put it in quotation marks. Now, if I run this, as you can see, this is literally printing my variable name because this is a string literal with that is my variable name, but this doesn't work. When you're using a variable, you don't put it in quotations marks because only strings go in quotation marks, and then in the same way only characters go in single quotes. So anyway, it is very similar with integers. So if I have this console.writeLine 9, everything that's printing is going to keep on printing, but then I expect to see a new line with the 9. Now, don't get too caught up on this, but if I hover over write line, you can see there's a plus 17 overloads. It just means that you can call this function in different ways and it'll work. So calling it with strings or calling it with integers, it works. And as you can tell, my 9 is not a variable, it's a literal integer. And so similarly, if I call write line with a variable, then I expect it to work as well in a very similar fashion. It's just passing 39 in the form of a variable, and the variable equals 39, as I've said in line 18. Now, I can use my int variable anywhere I want, however I want. So for example, I can reference my int variable here in the declaration and the assignment of a brand new integer times 10. And the ASIC to assign a value, this is a mathematical operation where I'm saying, hey, my int variable multiply by 10. And as you can see, C# has no problem giving times 10 the value of the value that comes out of the operation. And later on, I can keep using my variables anywhere that I want. And if I call console.writeLine and I say, hey, I want to times 10, add my int variable to it, this will still work because C# is going to interpret the operation before it calls writeLine. So by the time it gets to writeLine, it already has a value. It already added what would be 290 and 39. And this still works. It's still calling writeLine with just one parameter an integer. But what I want to point out is that, well, first of all, this works, which is crazy, but also I am using variables, and I am, boldly using my variables and referencing them and doing whatever I want with them. I don't have to do something like, in my head multiply it, and then, this will work, but what I want is to be using my variables, because that's just something that I want to be doing, so I don't have to write 290 every time. Or if I do something with my variable and it changes because I need it to change later on, and I just want to keep referencing that, I don't have to do the math myself. I can just let the variable keep track of its own value instead of me trying to rewrite it every time. It's just something that I wanted to point out. And the same will happen with characters. The same would happen with floats and doubles and everything that we know. I just wanted to showcase this for you. So in this case, n is my literal, and then my character is a variable that equals q, which is also a literal on its own, but this is the assignment of a value to my variable. And if I call print on right line on them both, is still going to work. It's not going to give you an issue. Right line can be called with characters as well, as you can see the NQ. And then later, if I want to reference my character, I can. So this add chars is a string. Really quickly, what I'm doing here is I'm saying, hey, I want n2 you to convert to a string, because then it's really easy to just add a character with the plus operator. If I had just the n, I believe that it would give me an issue, which I'm trying to avoid at the moment, because it simply it's unable to recognize this. So it's, for whatever reason, it thinks that it's an integer. I'm not exactly sure why, but I don't want to get into it. What I want to show you guys, what really matters to me, is that I can keep referencing my character, and I can use it in that way, so I don't have to just keep typing q over and over again. So you see here, and then q, then nq. Lastly, what I want to go over is that I can declare a variable and set it equal to a function. Now, this doesn't mean this string is equal to all of these words somehow, right? What it means is that return my string, I'm saying, hey, I want you to be equal to whatever's coming back from my function. So what happens is it gets to this point and says return equals, and then here it kind of takes a pause in this area, and it just jumps to this line here with the parameter I'm passing. So in this case, I'm passing u, and doing its own thing here. And so here saying, hey, any plus, and then whatever the character is coming, add it, put it together, then give it back. And so once it returns, it jumps into the place that it left, but instead of what it's doing, it's coming back with the results. And this, when you call this function, it doesn't really equal the function itself. That's not how it works. But what it equals, it's whatever's coming back from the return statement. And then if we run this, you guys will be able to see. Here's any plus u. This is referencing the value that's returning from my function. And what I want to get into is that I know that a string is coming from this function, and I know that I'm telling it to give it back. And because it's a string that comes from the function, I can just declare a function and set it equal to what comes back from it. And as you guys can see, I can pass parameters as literals. I can also pass parameters as variables. No problem. There you go. And so now I'm passing what would be q to my function, and it reflects on the value of return, as you can tell. So again, a literal is just a value on its own that I can use throughout my code. I can use it to call functions. I can use it to assign value to my variables, and they are very interchangeable. However, we prefer to use variables uh, a lot of the time. So I want you guys to get comfortable, setting a variable equal to a value and then referencing that same variable throughout, rather than having to keep using literals in your calls. I saw some people constantly using literals in their responses to the homework when I wanted you guys to use variables. I'll get into input and output in a different video, but having variables is very convenient when you're asking the user to give you an input and you want to capture that value and use it as you see fit. So that's coming up in a second. I want you guys to watch these videos, and I want you to discuss with me in class and to send me emails if you don't understand something, so that we can talk about it further.